I'm Robert Beiser. I'm executive director of an anti-human trafficking organization called Seattle Against Slavery. I'll tell you a bit about how I ended up traveling from the world of technology development into the world of helping people get to their freedom and how technology plays a role in it. But first, I wanted to introduce the actual technologist who will be talking about those pieces, Peter A.
Hello, everyone. Hi, everyone. So my name is Peter. I work as an engineer at Microsoft, although I'm not associated with Microsoft in this talk. So I'm here as a volunteer of Seattle Against Slavery. I joined this project in 2016, and since then it's been a great experience. It's been a good chance to contribute to some really impactful stuff, work with a great group of volunteers, and work on some awesome technology. So today, Robert's going to be filling us in on some really important stuff about the project and the context. I'll be talking a little bit about the experience of the tech team in building this product and a high-level architecture of the product, and a little bit about what we're still working on right now.
Great. So to give you a bit of context, we're going to be discussing human trafficking. It's a really horrible, violent crime. I just want to set expectations for the folks in the room. I'm not going to get into specific details around that, but I am going to tell you a bit about how I ended up learning about human trafficking and doing work on that. So if that's uncomfortable for anybody in the room, you can feel free to not be in the talk. We're also going to talk about some really deep technology integration stuff. That might be boring for some of the people in the room, but probably won't be triggering in the same type of way. So about 10 years ago, I had left the technology world, stopped being a web developer and a coder, and I was volunteering in Southeast Asia. And there was an NGO worker there who did health services, and he asked me if I wanted to meet the girls who he helped who were in a local brothel. And it was a pretty shocking introduction because I was there learning about economic development. And when I say girls, they were 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old girls, not adult women. And we had the chance to talk with them, and they had questions for us about our lives in the United States, and we had questions for them. And there was one girl who asked me a question that really changed the course of the rest of my life so far. She asked me if there were any places like that brothel where I came from. And it was pretty heartbreaking for me, because in her question was both that she wanted to escape, and the experience of the girls she was with was horrible, and she wanted to know if there's a place in the world where bad things like this didn't happen. And it was also heartbreaking because I knew from the work that I had done in social change work and community organizing back here in the States that there were kids just as young as her, 12, 13, 14-year-old, homeless and street-involved youth, folks from immigrant backgrounds who are undocumented, who were experiencing sexual violence, physical violence, just like she was. And I had never done anything about it here. I only really cared about it when it was far away. And I wanted to make a change. So when I came back to the States, I started learning from the people who know best. And I've heard some great things in this conference about hearing from your customers and the people impacted and the people who are stakeholders in what you're building. And for us, that was trafficking survivors. I started volunteering with an organization called Seattle Against Slavery. And we had some pretty straightforward goals of helping people get out of trafficking situations and helping stop the people who were exploiting folks in trafficking situations. But as we learned more about it, we wanted to go a step further and look at preventing upstream. And fortunately, we had some tremendous people in our community, volunteers who, as I had volunteered for Seattle Against Slavery before me, reached out to us and said, what could we do that would possibly use technology to help accomplish those goals of getting people out of trafficking and stopping people from exploiting them in the first place? We built this thing called Project Intercept. That's the name of the technology platform. And to explain how Project Intercept works, I have to explain a little bit about how online sex trafficking works. So you basically have two main parties to the commerce, the trade, the interaction. One being a victim, in this case we'll call her Zoe, and the other being the buyer. In this case, we'll call him Jack. Now there's a third person in a bunch of these cases, a trafficker or a pimp, but what we learned from talking with survivors and the service providers who work with them is that most of the time, Zoe is posted in an ad online. Think Craigslist used to be a site called Backpage. They pled guilty to felony human trafficking, so they're not around anymore. But there are a bunch of other websites. And we thought that it was trafficking rings and the trafficker who were posting them. But what we heard from survivors is no, the pimps and the traffickers don't want to put in that work, and they don't want the criminal exposure. So what they do is they teach the trafficking victim themselves how to post online. And then they say, bring me back $500 a day, $800 a day, $1,000 a day. And if you don't, violent consequences will happen to you or the people who you care about. And so the commerce starts. The buyer, in this case Jack, he just goes online and literally Googles something as simple as teen escorts, San Francisco. Might even get neighborhood specific. And then a whole bunch of websites pop up. He goes and finds that person online, and they send text messages back and forth. You can see why Twilio is going to come into this equation in a moment. So when we thought, how can we make sure that we reach out to those folks, the obvious solution was to jump in front of the opportunity that Jack has to find that person, Zoe, and contact her. And so instead, we built a text outreach app built on Azure Cloud Services, Microsoft volunteers. And we set up a web interface where advocates, service providers who have housing, who have substance abuse counseling, who have education and job opportunities available, those folks can reach out through SMS to people who are potential victims of trafficking. And this is an example of what it would look like. And this is a real interaction that's been anonymized where an advocate logs into the website and says, hi, my name is Molly, and I survived 10 years in the life. So that advocate is a survivor herself and can help. Let me know if you ever want to grab coffee, talk about ways to get out. Very simple, personal, one-to-one, because the relationship's important. And literally, this is a response that she got back. In one case, please help me. Me and my boyfriend and his dog have been sleeping in the car for months since winter. Please help us. I'm desperate. I have little money, not much. We are suffering, and I want to kill myself because there's no hope and little help or support from anyone. It is shocking the level of desperation that people express in the first message that they get back to a total stranger. Because in this case, we had gone to a website, scraped the content, put it in a database, and that was a website for selling sex. And this is the response that a person had. Now, she was able to connect with that advocate. It turned out that the boyfriend was actually the person who was exploiting her and had gotten her into selling sex to support his drug habit and keep them living in that car. And she is now completely away from that situation and has a life of stability and safety from simply receiving a text message. And Peter will talk a bit more about how Twilio helps facilitate that. But what we saw was that for every victim that we were getting out, there were all of these buyers, literally tens of thousands of buyers, a huge scale of men who were going online and ordering someone to have sex with, totally disregarding the possibility that they were in a trafficking situation, that violence could be happening to them. And they were putting money on the table that pimps and traffickers were not going to pass up. So if we got a victim out and someone said to that trafficker, hey, you can make $3,000, $4,000 a day if you find someone to exploit, if you find someone to sell to these men, they were filling that void left by the victim that we had gotten out as fast as they could. And so what we needed to do was disrupt the buyer who was putting the money on the table. And for that, we built a deterrence chatbot. So the deterrence chatbot poses as a trafficking victim, using the language of actual trafficking survivors. So we said to the survivors, what was the actual conversation you would have back and forth with a buyer? We want to mimic it exactly, because if it wasn't a chatbot, it would have been a trafficking victim. And instead of having ads for people, we put up lots and lots of ads for bots. And this is a real conversation, and it's a little small in there, so I'll sort of paraphrase the things that are happening. And when we put those ads up, there was a question of like, are guys going to know? Will they respond to a chatbot through a full conversation? And in this case, there's a guy who says his name is Joe, and his name is actually John Smith. His name isn't really John Smith. We anonymized all of it. But we built, in the integration, a White Pages Pro display that would give all the information as soon as we get his text message. The bot says her name is Ashley. Joe asks for a specific set of services. The bot says it's $100 an hour and starts revealing, I'm a little bit younger. So the bot is seeding in the conversation that she's probably underage, because that's one of the areas that we want to target. guys who are willing to buy from people who are clearly trafficking victims. Joe says, no problem, I'll treat you well. And the bot says, it's just because I'm 15 and still fairly new. And you hope that Joe at this point is like, that's crazy, that's not what I'm interested in. Obviously, I wouldn't buy sex from a 15-year-old, but instead he says, yeah, no worries, baby, and sends a kissy emoji. It's a real thing that happened. If that bot wasn't in place, he would be buying sex from a child. That person would be coming to wherever he said, and he'd be paying for it. But instead, because it's a bot, he gets a message that says, soliciting is a crime, buying sex can also cause serious harm to the victims, this incident will be reviewed, and you may be contacted by law enforcement. That is, we have different terms for it, but we call it, like, yeah, round of applause. So that's a bummer, to say the least. It's disruptive to his buying from a trafficking victim. And the important part to know here is we also offer resources to Joe. Because for many of these guys who are buying, and we integrate with programs that work just like with people who are committing domestic violence or sexual assault, these are guys who have habits that are going to repeat themselves over and over again. So sending that disruptive message, yes, we don't want him to buy from that particular person. But we also want to get him the education and support that will influence his behavior in the future. And what we've been able to see is that recidivism goes way down with these guys contacting ads that we put online. Even before they hit the deterrence message in the future, we know that talking to a bot once means that they're much less likely to try to exploit a child or an adult trafficking victim again in the future. So now I'm going to turn it over to Peter, and he's going to tell you a bit about how we put all this stuff together.
Thank you, Robert. Yes, as you can see, there's been an awesome amount of work from everybody who's involved here, from Robert, from everybody at the NGOs, and from a really nice group of volunteers who helped make this together. So I want to tell you a little bit about our journey in building this thing. So all of this started in 2016 at a hackathon at Microsoft. So I don't know, some of you may be familiar. Every year in July, there's a hackathon, a company-wide hackathon at Microsoft. You can bring in any idea and start to make it real. So Robert came in, a bunch of other folks from different NGOs who were involved in the space came in, and then a bunch of interested engineers and PMs and all kinds of disciplines from Microsoft came in. We got together, we built out something, kind of, initially it was kind of crummy, but it was a prototype and it did the job. We were able to integrate with Twilio, which was super helpful because, as you saw, text messaging is a primary means that most of this communication happened. And we built something that was kind of, in a bunch of different languages that somehow kind of came together, barely, and but it did the job. And this was in 2016. As this continued, we won the hackathon for the Hack for Good category that year, and we had a lot of support. So we continued into 2017. We started doing some work on stabilizing the platform, on bringing everything into a consistent set of languages, of taking customer feedback. So we started working with some of the NGOs that do this outreach work and seeing what kind of stuff that they need, how can we build it, how can we put it together. And in the meantime, we've received loads of support from Microsoft, so a lot of VPs at Microsoft who got a chance to present this. They gave us a lot of Azure credits. So this solution is sponsored financially through Azure credits for nonprofits. And we got to improving it. 2018, we started taking this a little bit further. So now we're running the solution. A few nonprofits are already starting to use this. Within the Seattle area, there's bots that are running in a bunch of regions around the US, and there's outreach work that's happening to the potential victims in every city through some awesome nonprofits there. And we've been productizing it, looking at how can we improve the security, having the necessary reviews, the accessibility, the usability, all the ilities, maintainability, manageability, all that kind of stuff. And there's still a bunch of interesting work that we're still continuing to do, so I'll tell you a little bit about that after. But first, let's take a look at how this thing works. So at a high level, there's two key scenarios here that Robert mentioned. The first one is the victim reach out scenario. So that one starts with the advocate. So the advocate is a volunteer or an employee of a nonprofit whose job it is to reach out to all the potential victims of trafficking out there, right? Our system automatically scrapes certain websites in some regions and then puts all the phone numbers that we managed to get out there, deduplicates them, and puts them in a database. So then an advocate can come in to work that day, log on to the website that's part of a platform hosted on Azure, and then say, today I want to send this message that's personalized and to this many people max. This is the max number of people I'll be able to handle per day. And pick a selection strategy. For example, I want to pick the people who have had active ads in the last, let's say, 2 weeks or something like that. Once they do that, they send a mass reach out message, and we batch these messages up. We have a distributed architecture that's resilient to failures at certain points in the pipeline, and we'll keep retrying the messages, and they go to Twilio. Once they go to Twilio, they can go up to 100 people, 200 people, 400 people, however many they selected. And usually, I believe a good outreach would get about 10 to 15%, that's correct, 10 to 15% response rate. So out of these 100, 200, 300 people, you get maybe 10 to 15 people responding, saying possibly they want services. As they start responding, we have a conversation UX on the website, so the advocate can log on, can continue to have these conversations. They can write case notes. For example, this person this is where they're at, this is what they need, or this person says, for example, right now is not a good time, maybe contact me in a week, something like that. Actually, recently I was speaking to one of the advocates, and they said that a trafficker wanted to get out of their life, actually. So yeah, that was interesting. So they kept that in their case notes, and the future people who in that nonprofit who wanted to continue this conversation can see the context. And all this information is stored in that database. So that's for the reach out scenario. The next scenario is a little bit more, I guess, of a technically challenging one. It's the chatbot. So as Robert mentioned, the goal here is to deter buyers of trafficking who may or may not know the impact of buying sex on the people that they're dealing with at scale. So one of the reasons this is needed to be at scale is because you could say, well, police could do this. They could set up things, arrest folks and stuff like that. But the reality is most law enforcement departments here are not equipped to deal with the scale of this problem. For example, in one city there could be hundreds, if not thousands of buyers. And within an average police force, there's maybe one person that's assigned to work on anti-trafficking work. So it's just not scalable. So in this case, the interceptor persona would be someone who either works in a law enforcement division that's using our system, or maybe a volunteer or an employee of a nonprofit who works on anti-trafficking situations whose job is to reduce the demand in that city. They would log onto the website once again and create a bot. So we have a very customizable experience for the bots. We've set up a bunch of personas that they could pick and then customize with a name, an age, location, prices, all kinds of stuff, even a photo. If you ask her for a photo and things like that. When they create the when they create the bot, we'll go to Twilio and provision a phone number dynamically in the area code that they requested, and then it will be set up in our database after that. From that point onwards, this phone number will be taken by the interceptor and put in a decoy ad in one of these classifieds websites where the potential buyers would look for it. As the potential buyers start messaging the bot, we will receive these messages on a webhook that we've set up and put it into our bot pipeline. So as part of this pipeline, we do a bunch of things. We batch up the messages. For example, if somebody, instead of answering everything in one go, they send it in like 4 or 5 different messages. So we'll batch up together all the messages in a given time period and respond to them together. We have integration with White Pages Pro, as Robert mentioned, so we can get some interesting information about everybody who's sending messages here. We can know if we've seen them before or if we haven't seen them before based on our own data, if they've already received the deterrence message or not, things like that. Then it goes through our natural language understanding model. This tells us, what they're probably intending to say in every part of the message. And then the bot logic is the part that's specific to every persona of the bot that the interceptor creates. So we can say, for example, when a buyer or a potential buyer says this, then this is how we're going to respond to it. Either ask a question about that or give them more information about this thing or something like that. Once this part is finished, then we'll go to natural language generation. We come up with a response message that we would like to send back, and then we put it in a queue for sending out to the potential buyers again. Throughout this whole process, a lot of data is saved in our databases, data about all the potential buyers, about the bots, phone numbers, etc. which can or cannot be used by the interceptor depending on the context if they would like to use it. So this is our architecture at this point. I mentioned before, here's what we got up to so far. You may be wondering, what we're working on right now. So in reality, there's still a lot to do. And as I mentioned, we have an awesome group of volunteers, but there's always more stuff to do than time to do it. So, the fundamentals of running a service. So this is a service exactly as you would find or run any other service at any big company. There's, life site issues that could happen. There's feature requests. We're always working with the customers. We have to deal every now and then with growing the scale if we're expanding this to different cities. All the illities that I mentioned before. Sometimes we have to deal with a change in what's happening out there. Maybe we need to scrape more places or support other stuff, improve the bot pipeline. For example, the batching, message batching feature is a recent one that came in, stuff like that. So there's always plenty to do, and it's a good opportunity for us to be able to contribute to this topic. So with that, back to you, Robert.
So I just want to say, and I take every opportunity that I can to do this, the volunteers from Microsoft, many of you work in the technology space. It is not usually a 40-hour-a-week job or a 50-hour-a-week job. Or maybe you work from one of those places that's like, I just come in and make my magic, and then I go skateboard. Tony Hawk outside. But these are folks who are working 50, 60 hours a week, and then over the course of the past 2.5 years, have volunteered over 1,500 hours as a group, which is like us having a full-time staff person who gets paid double what any of the people in our nonprofit would get paid. So that's been a really incredible thing. And Peter in particular has just been amazingly responsive, doing stuff from other places in the country while he's traveling, doing stuff on nights and weekends. So another big round of applause for a person who this isn't their job, and they just do this. Just care about it.
I should just say, this should be for the big group of volunteers as well, of which I'm a small part. Yeah.
So here's another important part, which is, does this work? So when we started building this in 2016, we were working with nonprofits that were already reaching out to trafficking survivors. And one of the ways they were doing it, and there's an organization like this in San Francisco and Oakland, is they would do street outreach. So in places where they knew street prostitution was happening. Locally in Seattle, there was a group that would get volunteers together, train them in how to be friendly and interact with people in street prostitution, let them know about services that were available. They'd have over the course of the year maybe 50 volunteers who would participate, going out at night between 9 p.m. and 1 a.m. They'd have security folks with them, maybe off-duty police officers volunteering or former military. And over the course of a year, they would get 3, 4, maybe 5 people who would be able to get out of trafficking situations. When we set up our text outreach platform in the first pilot year, in even the most limited version, we had one advocate at one organization. Every week around 2 p.m., she would send outreach messages. And in her first year of outreach, she was able to get 40 folks out of trafficking situation in 1 year alone. And one of the things that's really incredible about that is that we were able to see a change not only in the way that people were getting out of trafficking situations, but also in the way that service providers were starting to provide services. And this, I think, runs with the undercurrent around this whole conference. There's a huge set of people who are in trafficking situations who never want to have to go into an office and look face-to-face at a person and tell them the situation that they're in. They want to get housing, they want to get another job, they want to get substance abuse counseling, but they don't want to have to share what they've been through, and they don't want to have to deal with the logistics of getting to that office or maybe being in an unsafe situation because their trafficker is monitoring them. And so they're receiving case management just by text message. Because if you're telling someone they need to fill out a form to get housing, you don't have to be in an office and hand them a form. You send them a link through text, and then they can go online and do it. If someone wants to get into substance abuse counseling and they need a number to call, or they can text to get that advocate to do case management as they get out of trafficking, develop a safety plan, they can do all of that over SMS. And this year alone, we've had over 400 folks who are receiving ongoing interaction with a case manager just by text message without ever having to go into an office to get help to get out of trafficking. So that's pretty incredible too. Now, on the flip side, we want to disrupt those buyers. And some folks were like, your bots, I don't know if they're going to be able to go to scale. I don't know if people are going to not know that it's a bot, if it'll go all the way through the conversation. But to date, we've had over 15,000 attempts to buy sex from a potential trafficking victim disrupted. So that's another thing that we're really, really proud of. And we've only been doing this in 5 or 6 different markets. And when I say market, I mean like online, that's where the buyers go and search to buy in their area. But the thing that we know that's pretty clear is we have buyers all over the country. And again, we have bots that are posing as 15-year-olds, and these guys are saying yes. We have bots that are clearly not a human being, and the guys don't know the difference, just like they have no idea what kind of horrible violence is happening to the people that they might be buying if they're not interacting with their bot. And so we want to expand. As Peter said, productizing. We see all the folks who are working with us as partners because we're a nonprofit. They work in a for-profit company, so they see folks as customers, and so I think most of y'all do too. But these are folks who are dealing with the hiccups that come up with new technology. They're folks who are telling us we need the product to do this set of features and not that set of features. That's not that useful. And we've learned tremendous things, like around when buyers are contacting people online. We've gotten all of these business line link ups because people are doing this during the day at work and using their business phone so that their spouse or partner isn't finding out that they're doing it. The companies in our area are really interested to know if any of their business lines are on this. So some of them have sent us requests, and we say, like, send us a list of phone numbers. Maybe you think these people are buying sex online, or maybe it's all the employees that you have and you just want to know. And this is, public information, people interacting back and forth. And for all of the partners who are online, their personal interactions, so whether it's service provision or the people who are running chatbots, they own that data. We're not providing that data out to anyone else. And all of it is encrypted at rest so that if someone somehow was going to break through all of the security stuff that we have, all of the conversation data is going to be private after that. So there's nothing like a bot that you can't test out. So if you want to have a conversation with one of our staging test bots, here's a phone number. We made it. 415 might be an area code that you've seen before. And you can interact with it. Spoiler alert. What was that? Oh, no. Yeah. And all of our staging data, that's our internal stuff, and we end up deleting all of it later because usually the bots are doing weird things as we test them out. The other day, someone said, this might land well with the crowd or not, that they were talking to a person and they said, you need to go to Jesus to deal with this. And they were testing it out online, and the bot was like, hello, Jesus, how old are you? And what are the services that you're interested in? So, test bots, we figure stuff out. But the end of this isn't going to be a deterrence message. It's going to be an opportunity for you to connect with our website and learn more. But with that, I think we've got a couple of minutes left. And so we wanted to make this available for questions. But I just want to say, as a baseline and sort of a wrap up for us, the stuff that Microsoft volunteers have done has been amazingly helpful. There are lots of organizations here in the Bay Area who are trying to do work like this. I would encourage you to connect with them if you're here or in your local areas who are doing anti-trafficking work. And if you want to help us out with the stuff that we're doing, we just started talking about maybe using a Flex application, and we don't know anything about that. Yeah, like me and Tony Hawk talking about Flex. We don't know what we're talking about. There's the possibility that that stuff will be going on too. So if you want to connect with us and find out how you can help and support and help us expand to all of those other areas where people need help and where people are exploiting folks, we would appreciate it because it's going to take all of us. It's a big problem, but the technology and your help can make it something that goes away. So thanks.
Actually, just one thing as well, just want to reiterate, because I know I would be very worried as well if I see a number like this. All the systems that are used for this are completely different instance from what we use in production. So it's different database, different endpoints, different websites, different everything. So yeah, don't worry.
Yeah, this is on. Okay. I was just curious what tech you guys use to build the bot. I know we've seen Autopilot just came out, Dialogflow. Maybe it was built before that, but And the second question is there any tips that helped you spoof an actual human? I know it's kind of a big topic in chatbot technology, so.
Second question is easier than the first one.
You take second, I'll take first.
Okay, first one first.
Okay, so you asked what technologies we're using. So yeah, I think we built this before. A lot of the Twilio ones were out there. Actually, when we started building this, there was a bunch of chatbot technologies around, but none of them were mature enough or able to handle the scale or the many-to-many relationships or dynamically managing them or something like that. So we had to build our own. Most things we had to build our own. So we used a bunch of state-of-the-art services for language understanding, but everything else, the distributed runtime, the bot logic, the customization, the personalization, all of that stuff, we built it ourselves. And obviously, all the text messaging happens through Twilio. So
and
hopefully that answers.
The other thing, because he doesn't shine this up enough, it's Microsoft Cognitive Services. They have an incredible language understanding engine that can interpret a lot of this stuff. Capital J Jesus, they think it's a name, but there's a lot of things that they can understand, and the ability to build these Azure functions that can do all of the different bot learning. It's a really good system to use it. Right. Not to say that compete with Twilio, but that's what we built it on and it works really well. Right. The second question, I think goes a lot to how you're going to use bots. Guys who are buying sex have the same conversation almost every time. We read in something like 5,000 conversations that were captured by police doing decoy stings, and they were 93% same conversation flow every single time. And so I think a bunch of these questions about how do we make a bot that can effectively spoof people. I worked for Domino's Pizza when I was 16. I could have told you the exact conversation I was going to have for the next 45 seconds every time that the phone rang. And so I think understanding exactly what the conversations are that you're going to have the vast majority of the time, doing that 5 or 7% where you actually have to be dynamic, I think a lot of energy gets put into that. Build a user flow that's going to be most of the people that you're using, whether it's with Twilio, bots, or another application, and that'll get you most of the way there. Yeah. Other questions? We got time for 2 more, I think.
Hi, I was just curious how you make sure that your work on human trafficking, both sexual and labor orientated, does not also target sex workers. So clearly you use being underage as one thing to target, so child exploitation, but how do you make sure that the rest of your work also doesn't negatively impact sex workers or give them,
Yeah, so it's a really important question. I would say we work in the anti-violence space, like anti-gender-based violence, anti-labor violence space. And I've never at any panel that I've been with a domestic violence person or a person working on immigrant labor rights, heard someone be like, well, if you're running these ads on buses and trains, what about the people who see ads against domestic violence who aren't experiencing domestic violence themselves or who don't consider themselves people who are experiencing violence? We're reaching out offering services to a population that we find significantly needs those services. And for the folks who don't, either they don't respond, which is fine, or they respond and say, I don't need those services, mostly really politely, because they're talking to someone else who's been in prostitution. When it comes to the buyers, there is this sort of weird false dichotomy that the buyers would somehow know the difference between a sex worker and a person in trafficking. They don't know the difference between a person in prostitution or a police officer, and they don't know the difference between software and a human being. And so for them, they're trying to buy sex with someone that is going to be a trafficking victim. The marketplaces aren't segmented in any tangible way. And so for the people that we work with who are in prostitution, they're like, listen, if there are slightly less guys trying to buy from me, that's not a great situation for me. If you really are getting all of these people out of trafficking situations who, like in Seattle area, are dying. Like buyers are murdering people in prostitution. Pimps are murdering people in prostitution. They're like, if you can get them out and they want to get out, we will buy into, we will get a text message every so often, or you'll deter some of these other guys. And the service providers that we work with try to work really closely with the people who are like, I'm not in trafficking, I'm not in forced prostitution, this is my lifestyle, and I just want it to be safe and reduce the harm around it. And for us, because we're not a law enforcement agency, and we're trying to educate people on how to do this more safely, it becomes a less contentious issue. But it's important, because all these people could be impacted in negative ways, even negative ways just like, I don't like getting text messages from people I don't know, but they are putting their phone numbers out in classified ads online. But it's an important question. There's a question way far in the back. And then that'll be the last one, and then you can ask stuff up here.
Great presentation. What's keeping you guys from going worldwide with this?
So we aren't even national in the United States yet. We're in like 13 different places total between text outreach and chatbots. But the real issue is finance. Like we have one dedicated tech person. So if any of the folks in here were like trying to run software as a service company with like one person and a set of very dedicated volunteers, it's nearly impossible. So we need more staff to handle the feature stuff. We don't have like a customer success, manager, sales. It's me. And I also am running an organization that does anti-labor trafficking stuff and does political advocacy things, all sorts of different types of stuff. So it's really that we're just a small footprint group. So if someone wanted to give us, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of dollars from the Twilio Impact Fund, that would really help us. Not that that's a thing that we
No, but there is a grant round. Submissions of interest are due by this Friday, tomorrow, and we're providing $1 million in funding by the end of the year.
Yeah. So that's what it's going to be. We're a small organization. We're a startup in this space, and we're going to scale. So if folks want to volunteer to help us, if you just cashed out on another startup and you want to donate to us, and then we'll put your name as anonymous, but you'll know. Anything that you want to do that. So thanks so much to Twilio for having us. Thanks for everybody for coming. And if you have more questions, we'll be over here.